On a moonless night in the year of our Lord 1347, a wind blew through the port of Messina. Not a gale, not a storm, just a breath. And yet it carried death more cruel than any sword ever forged. The sailors had not spoken. What few remained aboard the Genoese ships lay slumped on the deck, eyes glassy, skin mottled with purple blotches like ink spilled across parchment. Rats darted between crates and corpses, their eyes gleaming like beads of obsidian in the torchlight. No one knew it then, but those rats had traveled farther than any merchant, crossed oceans and kingdoms, bearing with them the plague that would alter the very course of civilization. Brother Elias watched from the cliffs above, robes drawn tight against the chill. He had come to Messina from a small Benedictine abbey inland, summoned by rumor and fear. A chronicler by vocation, he believed the truth must be written, even if it stank of death. In his satchel were quills, ink, and a fresh sheaf of vellum. He would need more than that before the year was out. At first, the town believed the ships to be cursed. Priests rang bells, burned incense, and recited Latin exorcisms at the harbor's edge. But within days, the sickness leapt from the docks to the alleys, from the fishmongers to the cathedral choir. It spared no one. Children died in their sleep, strong men collapsed during morning prayers. The physicians, those who hadn't fled, wrapped themselves in robes of red and black, their beaked masks filled with rose petals and myrrh. They might as well have worn paper shields. Elias began writing by candlelight, even as the abbey grew quieter with each passing night. His fellow monks vanished one by one. Some died, others ran to the hills. He stayed, documenting not just the deaths, but the despair. They say it came from the east, he wrote, from beyond the lands of silk and salt. That it followed the trade routes like a shadow follows light. But what shadow consumes the lamp itself? He was not the only one writing. In Paris, scholars debated whether the stars had conspired against mankind. In London, barbers drained the blood of the sick in wooden bowls, whispering prayers over the steaming crimson. In Prague, the poor were rounded up and blamed, scapegoated by fear. Yet in every city, every village, the pattern was the same: swelling, fever, delirium, death. Elias journeyed northward, seeking refuge and understanding. Along the way, he passed empty farms, fields gone fallow, and cottages boarded shut with wax-sealed symbols painted on the doors. In one village, he found a child playing beside a corpse, humming a tune her mother had sung before her throat closed with plague. In another, he met a merchant who traveled alone with a sack of coins and no place to spend them. "The roads are quiet," the merchant said, sipping wine from a cracked flask. "Too quiet. Even the wolves have grown bold." They shared a fire that night. Elias asked why the man still traveled. "Because if I stop, it means it's over." Elias understood. Motion felt like resistance, even if it led nowhere. The deeper into the heartlands he went, the stranger the customs became. In one town, massed processions marched through the square, chanting hymns while flagellants whipped themselves bloody. In another, villagers huddled in silence around great bonfires, believing heat could drive away the sickness. Everywhere he went, the line between piety and panic blurred. He found a woman outside a ruined church, laying flowers at a pile of blackened bodies. "They said God is testing us," she murmured. "But I think we failed before he even began." In the margins of his journal, Elias began scribbling notations, not just names and dates, but symptoms, patterns, behavior. He had no microscope, no concept of bacteria, but something within him suspected the truth, that the plague did not choose sinners or saints, but simply spread, unthinking and indiscriminate. And yet, despite all he witnessed, what haunted Elias most was not the death, but the silence. The towns where no birds sang, the churches where no bells tolled, the silence of humanity in retreat, echoing off stone walls like a dirge. As winter approached, Elias reached a monastery high in the Alps. The air was thin, the sky brutally clear. Here, for the first time in months, he found safety of a sort. The monks had closed their gates and lived off stores and snowmelt. They let him in, but only after burning his robes and isolating him for days. From his new quarters, Elias resumed writing. "It is not war that has brought us low," he wrote, "nor famine nor fire. It is breath, touch, closeness, the very things that make us human." And beneath that line he added, I wonder if we will survive our own nature. He dreamed of rats with golden eyes, of cities made of bone, of a world where people wore masks not to hide their faces, but their fear. The dreams did not end when he woke. Outside, the wind howled over snow. Inside, the candle burned low. Brother Elias dipped his quill and kept writing. The sun rose late and reluctantly over the monastery, painting the snow in copper and bone. Brother Elias stood at the window, his breath clouding the frosted glass, eyes fixed on the valley below. It had been weeks since he had spoken to anyone for longer than a prayer or a blessing. Even within these thick stone walls, silence was the dominant language. But his mind wandered far beyond the Alps. He thought of Avignon. There, in the heart of Christendom, the Pope had surrounded himself with fires, literal rings of flame, meant to purify the air. Cardinals died 2 by 2. Messengers fainted in courtyards. The city choked on incense and grief. It was said that gold was no longer measured by weight, but by how many corpses lay between you and the source. Elias's fingers shook as he recorded these tales, not from cold, from something else. He wrote of the kingdom of fever, as he now called Europe. In this kingdom, kings ruled for days before dying. Queens wept alone in shuttered halls. Horses wandered empty fields, their riders long since buried. The crowned and the commoner were indistinguishable beneath the death shroud. Word came through travelers. A monk from Burgundy, a nun from the Rhineland, a merchant who had bribed his way through plague checkpoints. Each brought pieces of the same puzzle. Cities abandoned, mass graves dug by prisoners promised false pardons, wives burying husbands in their own gardens, too afraid to ring the chapel bell. And then came the burnings. In Strasbourg, they blamed the Jews, said they poisoned the wells. Hundreds were herded into barns and set alight. Elias read it all from smudged letters sent in trembling hands. Truth and madness were hard to separate. In Milan, something stranger happened. The city sealed its walls and refused entry to anyone, even its own kin. And somehow, miraculously, suspiciously, Milan survived. Elias underlined that passage. They denied the sick entrance, even mercy, and yet they lived. A cruel logic, but a logic all the same. As the monastery rationed its bread and the monks read psalms behind shut doors, Elias wondered how much kindness civilization could afford before collapsing under the weight of its own compassion. Then came a sound he had not heard in months: laughter. From the lower courtyard, a child's voice rose into the frozen air. He rushed down, heart pounding with disbelief. There, building a crooked snowman, was a girl of about 7, pale as the mountain wind. "You shouldn't be here," Elias said gently. "Are you alone?" She nodded, smile dimming. "They said I should walk north, past the valley, past the bones. They said someone would keep me safe." His throat tightened. "Who said this?" "My brother, before the coughing, before the bleeding." He brought her inside. The monks argued, of course, but Elias insisted. "If we abandon the last child," he told them, "then we are not monks. We are only men hiding behind stone." And so the girl stayed. Her name was Isabella. She did not speak much, but she watched, she learned, and she did not cry when Elias explained that her family likely slept in the arms of saints now. He taught her to read, to light candles, to mix bitter herbs into tea. She showed him how to laugh again. Winter slowly gave way to thaw. Letters arrived less frequently. The roads were no longer passable or no longer safe. The monks grew pale and spare, but within the walls, the child sang. Elias added new entries to his chronicle. "Some say death is the end of history. I say it is only a chapter, and children are the next." The thaw revealed more than just the earth. As spring stirred the land, it also disturbed what lay hidden beneath, the bones. Elias stood before the monastery gates with Isabella at his side, staring down at a merchant caravan that had collapsed near the trail. No one had come to claim it. The wagons, once brimming with goods, now carried only flies and a stink that turned the air thick. One of the monks, Brother Aldrich, brought word from the lowlands. Milan was now under siege, not from enemies but from doubt. Its success had bred suspicion. Was it blessed or simply ruthless? They say they burned their sick inside their homes, Aldrich whispered one night by the fire. Elias closed his eyes. Mercy had been exiled. Survival now wore the mask of cruelty. ... Word spread of new symptoms. Not just boils and fever, but madness, hallucinations, men who wandered naked through the streets, crying out names of saints and devils, clutching empty air. Some called it a different plague entirely, others a punishment layered upon the first. In Paris, mass graves were dug so deep the ground itself wept. Entire neighborhoods were buried without rites. Gravediggers died faster than they could be replaced. Elias wrote it all down. We are digging into the earth not for treasure or shelter, but to hide ourselves from what we cannot defeat. He and Isabella traveled briefly with a band of pilgrims, penitent wanderers seeking absolution by walking barefoot from shrine to shrine. They welcomed Elias for his scriptures and the girl for her silence. Among them was a woman named Anika, a former midwife who claimed to have seen angels made of ash and flies. The cities are poisoned, she said, not by rats or rot, but by our forgetting. We forgot the poor, we forgot the sick. The earth is simply reminding us. The words stayed with Elias. In Lyon, they passed a burned-out chapel turned plague house. Skeletons still lay in the pews. The altar was melted wax and bone. No one had returned. One boy, not yet dead, lay in a corner, whispering lullabies to the shadows. Isabella knelt beside him. She sang. He smiled once and died. That night, Elias did not write. He stared into the stars and waited for grief to pass. The wind had changed. Brother Elias smelled it before he saw it, the coppery breath of distant fires carried across the fields, like a whisper from a dying god. He and Isabella stood upon the edge of a hillside above a once thriving township called Lichtenhall. Now it was a cinder. From the heights they could see the ruined bones of houses, the collapsed bell tower, the twisted iron of market stalls. No birds circled the air. No dogs scavenged. Even the rats, it seemed, had abandoned the town. Only smoke remained, low, sluggish, like something reluctant to leave. Isabella held Elias's hand tightly, her knuckles white beneath woolen gloves. Are they all gone? She asked. Elias hesitated. Yes, but not forgotten. She said nothing more. Together they descended into the ashes. The streets were paved in black and gray, and silence reigned so completely that even their footsteps felt intrusive. Here and there they passed remnants of resistance, a rosary still clenched in a charred hand, a dining table still set for supper, its pewter dishes filled with soot. Inside the chapel, they found a wall of writing, messages scratched into the stone by desperate hands, names, prayers, accusations, pleas to saints who never answered. At the bottom of the wall, one final line, barely legible. If no one survives to remember us, then may God remember instead. Isabella traced the words with her fingers in the chapel's vestibule, burning fragments of hymnals for warmth. Elias could not sleep, not from fear, he had long since exhausted that emotion, but from the weight of remembrance. His satchel now bulged with pages, each line a death knell, each sentence a grave marker. In the morning, they continued westward. Word had reached them through a hermit's whisper. A healer lived near the river wall, a woman untouched by plague who brewed potions from root and bark, and who charged no coin, only memory. She takes your story, the hermit had said, his beard caked in snow, and if it's good enough, she gives you life. Isabella had laughed then. What if you have no story? The hermit had answered. Then you have no need for her cures. They crossed the wall 2 days later. The bridge was old Roman stone, cracked and weeded but still holding. On the far side stood a cottage draped in ivy and moss, its chimney puffing smoke scented faintly of aniseed and decay. A woman emerged before they could knock. She was ancient, her face lined like old parchment, her hair a crown of silver tangled with wildflowers. You've come far, she said, but that alone isn't reason enough. Elias bowed. We seek knowledge, not healing. That's rarer, she said. Enter. Inside was a chaos of scrolls and jars, skulls and herbs, feathers and wax. The walls were painted with constellations and diseases, saints and microbes drawn centuries ahead of their discovery. "You are the chronicler," she said to Elias without asking. He nodded. "And this," she turned to the girl, "is the one whose heart still burns." Isabella blinked. "I don't understand." "You will." That night, the woman, who called herself Alna, prepared a stew of roots and bitter wine. They dined in silence until Elias finally asked, "How have you survived?" Alna smiled. "Because I am not afraid to see. Most fear leads to blindness." "See what?" Isabella asked. "The disease, the patterns, the truths no church would speak." She gestured to a scroll near the hearth. It depicted the spread of plague, not as punishment, but as consequence. Trade routes, famine, war, overcrowding, ignorance. "Everything that made your world thrive also made it vulnerable," Alna said. "Your empires, your markets, your gods of gold. You built roads not just for silk and silver, but for death to ride swiftly." Elias stared at the map. It was the world laid bare in veins and vessels, a body infected. "What are we to do?" he asked. "Survive. Remember, rebuild differently." That night, Elias wrote more than he ever had before. The following days were filled with learning. Alna opened volumes bound in strange leathers, histories from forgotten libraries, accounts of plagues past and present. She showed Elias how mold could kill fever, how certain flowers repelled rats, how some illnesses avoided the mad entirely, but ravaged the sane. Isabella, meanwhile, watched. She studied the rituals, the runes, the preservation of herbs and vinegar and oils. Alna taught her not by words, but by gesture, by gaze, by firelight and silence. When at last it was time to leave, Alna handed Elias a single vial. "For when the words aren't enough," she said. He bowed. "What's in it?" "Hope, or poison, depends how you use it." Isabella hugged the old woman, whispering something that made her laugh. Elias did not ask what was said. Some things even a chronicler needn't record. Their journey continued northward, toward cities once famed for learning and beauty. Ghent, Bruges, Utrecht. Along the way, they met a band of traveling actors who performed death dances in the streets, dressed as skeletons and saints. "Laughter is the only thing that spreads faster than plague," the troop leader said. They stayed with the troop for several days, helping pitch tents and polish masks. One performance ended in chaos when villagers accused them of sorcery. A pyre was built. Only swift escape saved them. That night, Elias wrote, "Even joy is now suspect. Even song seen as contagion. We live in an age where delight must wear disguise." In Utrecht, the libraries had been sealed. Monks chained the books shut, fearing the parchment might carry death. Elias, furious, broke into one such abbey. He and Isabella spent a night copying texts by lamplight, treatises on anatomy, stars, and medicines made of mushrooms and goat's milk. By dawn, the guards found them, but one recognized Isabella's face from a dream he'd had the night before. "She is the child of fire," he whispered, and let them go. Elias didn't question it, not anymore. They crossed into the German lands where rivers ran black with ash. Entire forests had been felled to burn the dead. Villages posted signs, "Enter and die." Yet in some corners life began to stir. One town thought abandoned, welcomed them with flowers. "We have lived," the mayor said, "and we have learned. We share now, we do not hoard, we clean, we teach." It was a strange place, this village, half grave, half garden, but it sang with hope. Isabella played with children her age. Elias held lectures in a barn. "We must be better than before," he told the listeners. "Not richer, not stronger, just kinder, just wiser." He remained there 3 weeks, writing. When they left, the villagers lined the path and sang, a hymn not of death, but dawn. And still the road stretched onward. The road forked beneath the dying sky, each path veiled in fog and haunted by silence. Brother Elias stood still, staring down the two choices with the solemn patience of a man who had learned that any direction could lead to ruin or revelation. Isabella crouched beside a moss-covered milestone, tracing the worn lettering with her fingers. "East goes to the coast," she murmured. "West to the ruins of Velberg, to the roof. The university at Tholen had once rivaled Paris in scholarship and Prague in mysticism. Its towers were shaped like candles, its libraries built of pale stone and stained glass. But now it was a mausoleum of thought. Pages turned to ash, skeletons of students still draped in robes of midnight blue, walls scrawled not with formulae, but with final words, epitaphs of minds that had hungered for truth and starved of hope. And yet, someone had returned. Inside the observatory, by a great rusted telescope, aimed at a sky that no longer mattered, they found the cartographer. He was drawing, not maps of land or sea, but of grief. Cities rendered in weeping, rivers inked in despair, mountains measured in the weight of mourning. He did not turn when Elias entered. "I thought the dead had stopped arriving," the cartographer said. "We are not dead," Elias replied. "That depends who's doing the measuring." The cartographer's name was Reinhardt, and he had once charted the known world for emperors. Now he charted the unknown one, the one etched behind the eyes of survivors. "Where do you place sorrow on a compass?" Elias asked. Reinhardt smiled with dry lips. "Wherever you begin to forget." His latest creation was titled The Contagion Atlas, a tapestry of parchment stitched from 100 accounts. Each town bore not a name but a cry, each border a scar. Isabella studied the work for hours. She found her own village, though unnamed, unmistakable. The orchard, the old well, the crossroad where her brother had fallen. "How did you know?" she asked. "I listened," Reinhardt said. "The land remembers." For days they stayed, aiding Reinhardt as he inked the whispers of the past. Elias transcribed a monk's final sermon found in a latrine. Isabella mixed inks from herbs Alna had taught her to identify. The cartographer listened to them both, recording not merely what was said, but what was withheld. "There are gaps in every truth," he explained, "but even gaps can be measured." At night, the trio would sit in the shattered planetarium, where constellations no longer aligned with the sky. Reinhardt lit candles in old glass domes, casting artificial stars overhead. "We must rebuild the heavens," he said, "or the earth will devour us." The fourth evening brought riders. They arrived cloaked in crimson, their horses gaunt, their faces masked in silver filigree. No greetings, no names. Only an emblem sewn into their robes, a black circle encased in flames. Elias stepped forward. "What are you?" One rider dismounted. Her voice was clear and cold. "We are the circle of quarantine. We burn what cannot be saved." Reinhardt stood firm. "This place is knowledge. It must endure." The rider looked to her fellows. "Knowledge kills as easily as disease." She set a torch to the archives. Flame met parchment. Ink hissed. History wept. Elias lunged, snatching scrolls from fire. Isabella screamed. Reinhardt tried to smother a blaze with his body. By dawn, half the university was cinder again. The circle rode on. Reinhardt's hands were blackened, his eyes red, his voice gone to whisper. "They are not wrong," he said, "but they are not right either." Elias helped him rebuild what they could, but Reinhardt did not stay. He handed Elias the Contagion Atlas, charred at the edges, intact at its heart. "Take it where the stars have not gone dark." "Where is that?" Elias asked. "Wherever someone still asks why." They journeyed east again, past valleys of unburied kings, past cities turned to smoke. At a nameless riverbank, they found an old woman who brewed ink from willow bark and wept as she wrote the names of every child she had known. "I am their monument," she said. In a burned monastery, a boy recited scripture backward to confuse death. In a vineyard where the vines had withered, a man played a flute carved from his brother's femur. Humanity endured, not wisely, not well, but undeniably. And so Elias wrote, and Isabella remembered. They were no longer just witnesses, they were architects. East brought them into the Shadowlands, regions once charted by noble houses and cathedral builders, now marked only by absence. Fields lay fallow. Roads were broken and swallowed by bramble. Villages bore names no tongue had spoken in years. But the silence, oh, the silence. It was a thing alive. At first, Elias and Isabella believed they had simply crossed into lands abandoned by plague. But then they came upon what had replaced the people, statues. Dozens, sometimes hundreds, made of clay and bone, arranged in human poses, standing at windows, sitting around hearths, kneeling in fields. Their eyes were hollow, mouths forever open in voiceless lament. Who did this? Isabella whispered. Elias shook his head. Someone who couldn't bear forgetting. On the third day, they encountered the sculptor. He lived alone in a churchyard surrounded by his creations. He called himself Father Miro, though he wore no cassock, no collar. His hands were stained with ochre, his beard tangled with straw. I give form to the silence, he told them. If we don't fill it, something else will. He sculpted from memory, his wife's smile, his son's laugh, his parishioners' mid-benediction. He placed them where they had last lived. He called it honoring. Others called it madness. Elias recorded his story, but Isabella did something else. She sculpted. One small figure, a boy with his hand raised toward the sun. He's reaching, she said, not waving goodbye. They stayed 1 week. On the final night, Father Miro took them deep into the catacombs below the chapel. There, in near total dark, lay hundreds more figures. These were not arranged in living poses. These knelt, prostrated, wept. This is where the silence begins, he said. The next morning they departed. Father Miro stood at the road's edge, holding a new statue. It resembled Elias. For when you do not return, he said, though I hope you will, though beyond the sculpture lands, the world shifted again. Here were nomads, bands of former lepers, exiled midwives, failed priests, who called themselves the breathless. They wore no masks. They traveled together, but did not speak. Every gesture was sign. Every song was hummed, never sung. Isabella watched them with awe. They don't fear death, she said. No, Elias replied. They've simply learned to live beside it. One of the breathless, a woman named Naira, taught Isabella a prayer spoken with hands alone. It meant, I carry your sorrow like a lantern. Elias wrote nothing that night. He simply sat and wept beside their fire. The coast appeared like a mirage, silver water, gulls that cried like ghosts, and ships that bobbed abandoned. At a ruined port called Caer Ethel, they found what remained of the sea clergy. These were not priests in the traditional sense. They were navigators of plague currents, men and women who had tried to trace the disease by boat, following infection as if it were a tide. Their leader, a weathered woman named Severin, showed Elias her map. It moves with the wind, she said, with rats, with salt, with sin, perhaps. The map was impossible, covered in swirling lines, layered with runes, inked in salt water and blood. But it's true, Severin said. It's how the sickness breeds. That night, Severin told them of the Black Fleet, a convoy of ships filled with the infected, set adrift by desperate nations, a floating acropolis, untouchable, undockable, lost. They're still out there, she said. Some say they sing. Elias asked if she'd ever seen them. Once, from a distance, like shadows on the sea, he recorded every word. They left the port with gifts, preserved ink, a compass that spun wildly, and a vial of water taken from the heart of a storm. On the cliffs beyond, Isabella stopped to look back. Do you think they're right? She asked. About what? That the sea remembers everything? Elias nodded. Yes, and it forgives nothing. As they walked inland again, Elias noticed something new in Isabella. She no longer looked afraid. Grief still followed her, but now it walked behind her, not beside. In a valley overrun with wildflowers, they encountered a circle of stones etched with names. Some were old, some recent. All had one thing in common. The names were followed by a phrase: known, loved, named. A young woman tended the circle. She invited them to sit. This is where we give names back, she said. She explained, when entire towns died, the names died too. Here survivors came to speak them aloud, so that memory would outlive silence. Elias added names from his journal. Isabella added her family's. They stayed until the sun fell. That night, Elias wrote, the opposite of plague is not health, it is memory. Health. They came upon the ruins of Belclare by accident. It was not on any map, not listed in any ledger Elias had copied. No markers lined the road. And yet as they crossed a crooked stone bridge, the town unfolded before them like a wound reopened. Belclare had not burned like the others. Its buildings still stood, wooden facades weathered but whole, doors closed as if waiting for keys that would never turn. But every window was shattered, every well had been bricked shut, and on every door someone had painted the same symbol. a golden eye above a black flame. Isabella touched one. Does it mean plague? Elias tilted his head. I don't think so, I think it means knowledge. In the town center stood the Fever Archives, an ancient building half monastery, half library. It had been sealed with iron and mortar, but the seal was broken. Inside there were no shelves, only crates, hundreds of them, each labeled with names, dates, symptoms. It was not a library of books, it was a catalog of death. Elias opened one crate. Inside were letters written by victims in their final hours. Another held samples of herbs pinned to parchment, annotated in ink and blood. Another, masks, some simple linen, others gilded, ceremonial, grotesque. I thought we were collecting stories, Isabella whispered. We are, Elias said, and so were they. They spent days sorting the crates, drawing patterns, building timelines. A plague had swept Belclare before the Black Death, an earlier sickness, unknown to most records, that killed not in days, but over months, unraveling the mind before the body. Its victims had called it the Pale Guest. Isabella found a child's diary tucked behind a floorboard. Its final page read, "He lives in the mirror now. He wears my father's face." She showed Elias. Neither spoke. In a sealed vault below the archives, they found something else. Instruments. Crude syringes, glass vials, metal hooks. Notes written in Latin and Old Breton. It was a laboratory. They had not merely recorded the disease, they had tried to control it. One parchment, almost too faded to read, bore the heading, Inoculatio Experimentum No. 4. Beneath it, a single line. We gave the fever to a criminal. He died grateful. Do you think they were trying to cure it? Isabella asked. Elias nodded slowly. Or understand it, or punish it. I don't know. They buried the instruments in a garden overgrown with nettles. That chapter, Elias said, we won't let survive. That night a storm rose, lightning struck the bell tower, fire leapt from roof to roof as if the town itself demanded erasure. Elias and Isabella fled into the rain with crates strapped to their backs. The Fever Archives collapsed in flame. They watched from the bridge. Should we have saved more? Isabella asked. We saved the right things, Elias answered. We saved the truth. They traveled east again, into highlands where the air grew thin, and the forests whispered in strange dialects. There they found the Abbey of St. Mirren. The monks there had not fled the plague. Instead, they had invited it. We let it in, said Brother Hadrick, the last among them, and in return, it let us see clearly. The abbey walls were covered, not in prayers, but in questions. What is breath? What is soul? What is silence made of? In the scriptorium, Elias found a book with no words, only fingerprints pressed into pages, as if pain itself had become a language. Can you read it? Isabella asked. Not yet, Elias said, but I will. They stayed through winter. Snow turned the world clean. At night, the mountains sang. Elias taught the monks to write again. Isabella taught them to sculpt. They added names to the journal every day, not of the dead, but of the remembered. And when spring came, they walked on. Toward the final place, they reached it at dusk, the city with no name, no steeples, no walls. Just a sprawl of stone bones, swallowed by moss, hidden between mountains like a secret never meant to be spoken. No birds flew above, no roads led in, and yet Elias and Isabella stood at its edge, the final chapter unfolding beneath their feet. It was once the capital of scholars, a hub of healers and mystics, a library so vast it was said to contain the dreams of every sleeping mind. But now, it was silence sculpted into ruins. The gates were broken, the streets overgrown. Yet strange marks lined the cobblestones, symbols painted in charcoal, like messages left by ghosts. What language is that? Isabella asked. Elias studied them. It's not a language, it's a pattern, a memory. They followed the trail. At the city's heart stood the Grand Archive. Its roof had collapsed, but the walls endured, held together by ivy and intention. Inside, rows of statues lined the aisles, not of kings or saints, but of ordinary people. Each held a tablet. Each tablet bore a single word: forgiven, witnessed, lost, endured, remembered. In the center lay a great table of obsidian, polished until the stars reflected in it. Upon it a final book, bound in black bark and gold thread, the last chronicle. Elias opened it. Inside were only blank pages. "It's waiting," he said. He placed their journal beside it. Isabella took out the vials, the inks, the herbs preserved from Alna's cottage, the ashes from the fever archives, the pressed flowers from St. Maron's Abbey. Together they wrote. Not an ending, a legacy. They wrote names, they wrote stories, they wrote how it felt to hope in the midst of collapse. They wrote that survival was not the absence of loss, but the defiance of forgetting. When the final word dried, Elias looked up. "Do you think anyone will find it?" Isabella smiled. "We did." The wind rose outside, gentle and warm. They left the book upon the obsidian table. They walked back through the ruins. They crossed the mountains, and as they vanished down the winding pass, something stirred behind them. A candle lighting itself, a page rustling, a breeze whispering through the grand hall, like a voice returning after centuries of sleep. Not an ending, a beginning. And so, dear listener, if you followed us to the very end of this long, quiet road, thank you. Let the silence of history never frighten you again, for within it live the names, the breath, the memories of those who endured. We are their witnesses. We are their storytellers. And if these stories brought a stillness to your night or a light to your dreaming, we invite you to stay with us. Subscribe to the Story Vault. There are many more echoes of the past still waiting to be found. Sleep well, fellow traveler, until the next tale unfolds.